So the question is like, what do we do now? Like, part of this whole like TBH, especially this first series, is trying to get you guys resources and things that you need to think about, or things to read, things to talk about, things to listen to. Just what are some places you need? Where should you start? Is the question that we get a lot of, and I think before you can read anything or do anything, I think you need to listen. I think that the thing that we're missing the most of is that we don't listen to one another. You look at social media today and there's just so much like arguing and people grandstanding, trying to get their point across, and people just elevating their volume so they get heard over someone else, and nobody's really listening. I think the thing that has been really special in this season, as weird as this season is that I've had conversations with students and kids that I've known for a long time, and some of them are alum and they're not in WC students anymore, and some of them are still in WC students, and they're asking, they just want to know. They just want to know like what my experiences were and what do I think about everything, and they're listening. They're not trying to argue, and they're not listening so that way they can respond, but they're listening so they can understand. And I think that that's the piece that's missing from this whole kind of like conversation. You know, you think back to what happened with Colin Kaepernick and kneeling for the flag, and the thing that he kept saying over and over again is that people aren't listening to what his real grievance was. And, you know, you can get into the issue of whether or not you can, kneeling for the flag was a proper way to protest, but the reality is that what he was wanting to talk about, no one was listening to, and that was police brutality. And so today, when we're having these conversations, like, I hope that we're listening to one another. I think that is going to be our first step. And as we look at like how Jesus interacted with people, Jesus would listen. He was paying attention. He gave people his full attention. You think about the story of the guys who broke into the roof of the house and dropped their friend in, or you look at the story of the lady who had been bleeding for 12 years. In both of those cases, like Jesus is surrounded by people. Whether it's in the house, there's a crowd of people listening and needing something from him, or maybe it's this woman who was like, for the woman, it was on the road and he was actually on his way to go heal another girl. And in both of these situations, like the reality is that there were a lot of people that needed something from Jesus, and the friends with their with the guy on the mat or the woman who had been bleeding, they were not the only ones in that moment, in that situation, that needed Jesus's attention, or they needed something. And yet when Jesus like talks to them, he doesn't dismiss them or tell them to get back in line, or, well, you've got other people that are dealing with the same, or dealing with other issues too. Or in the case of the woman like that had been bleeding, it's like, hey, this girl is more important because she's about to die. He doesn't do that to them. But what he does is he like gives them, he listens. And I love it. It says that he had compassion on the lady who had been bleeding. And I think that's the mentality we're supposed to take, that the person sitting in front of us, that they get our full attention and they get our compassion, that we're listening so that way we can have compassion about what they're dealing with and what they're experiencing. You know, my story is not typical, and so like for me, like I have friends and I have family whose story is very different than mine. Like their experience is very different. They aren't comfortable with police officers because of things that have happened to them. They have been racially discriminated against. And I've got to be willing to listen. Like, though we don't have the same experiences, I've got to be willing to hear them out and understand. And I think that's what we need to do. Like, if you're trying to figure out what your first step is and wading into this water, how can you be different? I think your first step is you've got to start having conversations, some very like honest conversations with the Black people in your life. You know, I'm not asking you to go out on the street and like talk to somebody that you don't know really well. But like you've got people in your life that are Black. Have you talked to them about this? Have you had a conversation with them and ask how they're doing with all of this or what their experiences were like. And for some of them, they're tired of talking about it. They want change, and they're angry and they're upset, and you've got to be willing to take that too. But for us, for us to move forward, we've got to be willing to listen and to take the calm conversation with the harsh conversation. To take that maybe you're going to agree on some things, and maybe there's some things that you're probably never going to see eye to eye on. I think that was probably the most fascinating part of like the conversations I've had with these students, is that I don't think that we walked away like having an agreement on everything and every issue, or how all of this can be solved, or the best way to go about handling this. But I think that what has come out of it is like a deeper connection with those that I've had conversations with. Kids that I've known really well, and we've talked about a lot of things, from family issues and dating issues and like life in general, and like we have a deeper relationship because we could have like these honest conversations. And so I hope that like in this season, like you don't, and even like beyond like the hysteria and all the hype and the elevated like sensitivity to this, but I hope that it builds in this practice of you like deepening your conversations with people, and particularly starting with your friends that are Black. And parents, if you're listening to this, maybe it's you may not be close to any Black people or have them in your circle, but your kids do. And maybe it's sitting down with your kids' friends' parents, and having conversations with them, and what it's like to not only experience like this stress of racial tension, but what is it like to raise children in this? And like having those kind of conversations as well are so important. And that's how you deepen your relationships. That's what's going to lead to transformation. Not that you completely understand, and because some of that stuff you only really understand through experience. But there's going to be a lot more compassion. There's going to be a lot more sympathy or empathy, whichever one you're supposed to have in these moments. But there's going to be, I think that's what's going to lead to transformation. That's going to lead to like whatever, like reading and podcasts or anything that, like any other resource. If you're not willing to listen, none of that stuff is going to work. And so my encouragement and my challenge to you is to listen. To have the hard conversations, to wade into those waters with people and get uncomfortable and say like, man, I want to know what you've experienced, and not listen so that way you can say, well, other people have had it worse, or this situation is, that's not how all of these things work, or, trying to bring like what, like quote unquote perspective. I think that the main thing that you're wanting to do is to listen and have compassion. So we start there, and we start having these conversations with people, conversations that we probably should have had a long time ago with people that we love and care about, but we've never actually sat down and had those conversations. For me, they've been so helpful over these last few weeks to have these things and to have honest conversations with people. And I think if we start there, then that's going to be a great first step in us moving in a direction that actually leads to transformation and healing.